And we are live. Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe. Let's hope you can all hear us. And let's hope someone shows up. Ironically, last time there was someone on Twitch throughout the entire time. And at least on our last stream, which was over on Power Rangers, at least my last stream. And, well, that was the only consistent person, but that was weird. We don't normally get people over on Twitch, but we might this time. So, as I said, we're going to generally keep this brief and discuss Smaug as it's Dragon Month, and I'm needing another week to work on the Lord of the Rings audiobook. Although, if I need the extra week, I may move Dragonlance temporarily to Wednesday next week, just to. Yeah, it's because Tolkien reading day is next week, and I have to prep a video or two for that. So, yeah, that's something. And one pleasant thing about being able to stream on Twitter, is not Twitch, is that I don't really have to market the Twitter stuff too much because we're clearly live on Twitter. Anyways, I just have my one page of notes here, which is basically my cue card. All right. Smaug is a character with an interesting history. And by interesting, I mean short, and he doesn't really do much. Yet he's still an interesting character because he's written by Tolkien. Appearing in 2770 of the Third Age, he ransacks the Lonely Mountain where the kingdom of the dwarves is to be found. This was one of the last kingdoms of the dwarves, and it was fabulously wealthy. And Smaug is said to be a young dragon, but then by the time of the quest in 2941, he's said to be an old dragon, which doesn't make much sense because as a dragon, he has a lifespan of centuries, and yet he's called old by that time. So this is, I think, a bit of a hiccup on Tolkien's part. One of the few, because he's not prone to hiccups with his timeline and with his lore. So in that regard, Smaug's already got a bit of an issue there. What's funny, though, is that Thror and Thrain end up escaping from Smaug through a hidden trapdoor in the mountain, which is pretty funny because, well, they just appear on the hill some distance away in the flashback, at least as described. Basically, their faces covered in soot and whatnot, and they had a close one. That said, Smaug as a character does live up to certain stereotypes of dragons from the Middle Ages. That is to say, you've got the whole connection to the devil, so to speak. And the main thing I could think of was that it seems like, according to Bilbo, that Smaug is seething with heat, and that this element of the character is one that hints at, the nature of the Christian devil. And the only reason I'm pointing this one out is that this is a connection that it's just a brief description in passing about how he's that he seems to radiate with heat near the end of The Hobbit. But it is important to bear in mind what Tolkien was approaching the character with. That being said, I'm not saying that the only way of reading the text is a Christian one. Far from it. And I think it's just important to bear in mind where Tolkien was coming from. He was coming at this from a traditional element, although he does have his ice dragons, so to speak, at least according to the myth of Fram from the Rohirrim. So we've got Smaug, though, who is described as the greatest of the dragons of the Third Age. So right there, we've got some pretty interesting descriptions there. Smaug's clearly a very fiery dragon. That said, he is vain and boastful and ends up rolling about in his gold, exposing his chest and thus his weakness without a second thought, showing himself to be fairly foolish in some ways because he's boastful. Now, just to contrast him with other dragons in the Legendarium, we don't know what Scatha was really like, but given that Fram seems to be a good stand for Beowulf, one should perhaps look to the Beowulf myth for inspiration for what Scatha is like, at least in regards to how he operates and probably how he thinks to an extent. In regards to Glaurung, I would not say was exactly boastful so much as cruel and manipulative. Then you have you have Angalagan the Black, which we don't know much about, but Angalagan seems to have been very, very fierce and seems to have had the very hottest of fiery breaths. So we have with Smaug the most amount of character after, of course, Glaurung. Although that being said, it seems like these two are very different archetypes. Glaurung seems more like the Shadow Magician archetype, the manipulator. I did a video on that. Do check it out. That being said, it would appear that with Smaug, he's more the sadistic Shadow King archetype, prone to foolish boast and to, greed and folly. He is, of course, the traditional dragon archetype of Western literature, but with his folly and his obsession with inflicting pain on others, he does have a sadistic element. And arguably, both Bard and Thorin, when they start to get greedy for the gold, same with Thranduil to an extent, although Thranduil to a much lesser extent than the other two, they start to comport themselves. These kings start to comport themselves rather like Smaug. There's an archetypal similarity between them. And Smaug, though, also tends to revel in the pain and the damage he's inflicted on the dwarves, such as boasting of how, as far as he's concerned, there's almost nothing left of Thror's bloodline. And he also boasts and is very pleased when he smashes a portion of the mountain apart because, so much for the dwarves. That being said, Smaug's tendency towards cruelty also extends towards enjoying turning Bilbo against the dwarves. And what's interesting here is that where Glaurung is very, very successful at it, and is quite good at it, Smaug's not very good at it. Like, this was something that I found just interesting in the book because, let me see. I believe it's around page 262 of my paperback edition, which I have a reprint, as everyone could see, from the movie era. I'm sorry, but I lost my original edition years ago, which is just a great shame. I'll have to get a new edition at some point, maybe a hardcover edition at some point, if I can ever afford it. Let's see, where is it? He begins to no, it doesn't seem to have been page 62. Oh, here it is, 260. Let's see. I don't know if it has occurred to you that even if you could steal the gold bit by bit, a matter of 100 years or so, you could not get it very far. Not much use on the mountainside, not much use in the forest. Bless me, had you never thought of the catch? A 14th share, I suppose, or something like it. Those were the terms, eh? But what about delivery? What about cartage? What about armed guards and tolls? And Smaug laughed aloud. So, in that regard, we have Smaug, who is obviously reveling in trying to turn Bilbo against his friends. But what's interesting is that, he does do a pretty good job here, it seems, to an extent. But the trouble is, while he does point out some actual truth here, rather like Glaurung, it's nothing. He's nowhere near as skilled as Glaurung, to be quite honest. Actually, let me revise my statement. I said he's a Shadow King archetype, but he might be better thought of as a Shadow Warrior archetype now that I think about it. As a sadistic warrior rather than a sadistic king, because there is a sadistic king kind of archetype. But maybe Smaug out to be thought of in a sadistic warrior archetype style. Now, there is a few pages of dwarves who reassure Bilbo, and this is a really interesting paragraph where Thorin just waiting for it to stop struggling. Data, okay. All right. So here we get the talk turned to the dragon's wicked words about the dwarves. Bilbo wished he had never heard them, or at least that he could feel quite certain that the dwarves now were absolutely honest when they declared that they had never thought at all about what would happen after the treasure had been won. We knew it would be a desperate venture, said Thorin, and we know that still. And I still think that when we have won it, will be time enough to think what to do about it. As for your share, Mr. Baggins, I assure you we are more than grateful, and you shall choose your own 14th as soon as we have anything to divide. I am sorry if you are worried about transport, and I admit the difficulties are great. The lands have not become less wild with the passing of time, rather the reverse. But we will do whatever we can for you and take our share of the cost when the time comes. Believe me or not, as you like. Now, here we get Bilbo starts to feel a little better, but something to bear in mind is that he does not turn on the dwarves. And this might sound weird, but were it Glaurung, he would have already turned on them, because Glaurung was much more clever and sneaky and successful with his words when it came to twisting people against one another. So in that regard, the dwarves are fortunate. That being said, the trouble is that Glaurung would also, I don't think, have made the same foolish mistake as to show off his magnificent belly to Bilbo, who, quite frankly, could not have succeeded in taking advantage of that weakness if he tried. But just the knowledge of it, leaving the cavern, that's not exactly Smaug's greatest moment. So Smaug has more bronze than brains, one can simply say. Not to speak too ill of Smaug, he is quite good at what he does, which is to say burning people alive and generally spreading chaos and mayhem and misery. So, looking back at his track record, yeah, he would not be the Shadow King archetype, but rather the Shadow Warrior archetype. He seems to be fancying himself the new king under the mountain.
He spent so much time invincible seemingly invincible with no one to challenge him, that here it is, he had it in his mountain. Oh, no one can fight me. So he got arrogant and
lazy. Well, okay, so I'm going to ask you, are you proposing that arrogance comes from mental laziness as much as pride?
That's a very good question. And I think it's a very big possibility because yes, it could come from pride, but coming from sloth, getting
Sorry. I have no idea who that was, and I don't care to know right now.
And because he got lazy, he got contemplative. He spent so much time.
Complacent, you mean, not
complacent.
Contemplative would have meant he wouldn't be so arrogant. Complacent means that's how he got so dumb. But yeah,
complacent.
I get it. Second language troubles.
And and I suppose that it can be one source.
Well, Smaug is compared to a cat at one point, actually a great big tomcat. So I wonder if, given how lazy tomcats can be, I wonder if we shouldn't consider Smaug as indolent. Like, we're always claiming he's fairly prideful, and this is something the fan base has frequently said, oh, he's too proud, which I've seen it in the Tolkien fan subreddit, which I really like that place. I think I've seen Redbook call him that, at least in the private chat a few times. But when it comes to, which I doubt he'll ever take a look at this stream because he's got much more important things to do, I imagine, but still it'd be nice. But I think that the comparison to a tomcat should not be taken lightly because, and the fact that Smaug does purr like a tomcat does show that why he's so unlikable. I mean, who even likes cats? They're only good for hunting mice, and they're only pleasant when they're barn cats. Any other kind of cat isn't likable. I'm joking.
Which brings up another matter.
So does this mean that he's more guilty of the sin of sloth, mentally and physically, or pride?
I don't think it's so much pride as it is vanity.
Well, vanity is pride. No, yeah. I'm going to argue completely that is pride.
Fair.
Because vanity is just physical pride, or at least it's a personal kind of pride. There's pride in general. There's vanity. There's narcissism. There's zealotry, I would argue, where you don't want to admit that any of your ideas are wrong and whatnot. Zealotry / fanaticism are basically the same thing. So I'm just saying all these concepts, pride encapsulates all of them in terms of the original great sin of traditional thought in the West and even in the East. Like, this is something I find very weird, is that people often say, well, like the 7 sins and the 7 virtues, like this is purely a Christian thing. Not exactly, because when you look at the romance of the 3 kingdoms, Dong Zhuo is accused of often being over gluttonous. He's often accused of the sin of gluttony, and they do pretty much use the term the sin of gluttony. And well, maybe not in those words, but okay, for heaven's sake. Why is it not turning off? There. I have no idea why I couldn't turn it off for a sec. Because that was weird. Sorry about that, everyone. I have no idea why my phone's going off. I actually thought this thing was turned off. Power off. Yeah, there. I have no idea why people are suddenly calling me. It's all it says is Ottawa, California. I have no idea. It's probably just a bunch of scams. Mm-hmm. Well, our mother was warning me earlier about there being a lot more scams recently. But anyways, yeah. So I'd argue that fanaticism, zealotry, vanity, narcissism, these are all encapsulated by the sin of pride. And that, like, you look at Chinese literature, there's Dong Zhuo is accused of too much gluttony. You have Taira no Kiyomori in the novel of the Hekemonogatari. He's accused of having too much pride and wrath as sins, and even greed. And even on occasion lust. Like, he's basically accused of having every vice known to man, but primarily these ones. You look at for example, I forget, it was a traditional Korean novel. I only read a little bit, but the main character's dad, who's I think the Emperor of Korea, is accused of having sloth as a sin and being lazy and slow to deal with problems. And so this is not just a Western concept. This is something pretty universal, I think, when it comes to the idea of these particular sins and whatnot. And Smaug definitely has sloth and pride down to a science, or to an art form.
He's very indolent.
Yeah, he's lazy, but once he gets going, it's because he's angry. Where's that paragraph? I really like. Now, I didn't put it in my notes, but I thought it was hilarious when where was it? Well, okay, I'm sure I can find it. It was just funny how Smaug just starts shrieking, "Thief, thief," and whatnot. That part I love. It's like, wow. Did you happen to forget that you stole everything here first?
Well, he stole it all fair and square.
Yeah, true. That sounds like something that Autolycus from Hercules' Legendary Journeys might have said. The King of Thieves. But I'll never find it now. But there's another interesting point to Smaug. It's in that Smaug's defeat comes in the form of an arrow, with Bard praying to his arrow, saying, "Arrow, black arrow, I have saved you to the last. You have never failed me, and always I have recovered you. I had you from my father, and he from of old. If ever you came from the forges of the true king under the mountain, go now and speed well." And the black arrow sped straight from the string, straight for the hollow by the left breast where the foreleg was flung wide. And it smote and vanished, barb, shaft, and feather. So fierce was its flight. With a shriek that deafened men, felled trees, and split stone, Smaug shot, spouting into the air, turned over, and crashed down from on high in ruin. Full on the town he fell, his last rose splintered, it to sparks and glades. The lake roared in. A vast steam leaped up, while in the sudden dark under the moon there was a hiss, a gushing whirl, and then silence. And that was the end of Smaug and Esgaroth, but not of Bard. So here Smaug clearly meets his doom, but we get here it's interesting because we get in the Christian sense of the story the prayer to the arrow, where the character has to give a prayer and shows piety before he can take down the enemy. This is a classic theme in Judeo-Christian medieval literature. This is a common thread. But you never prayed to your weapon. Now, the calling upon the weapon to smite the enemy and save you, and the way it's framed is more reminiscent of Norse sagas. And it's also the fact that the arrow always found its way back to him, and that Bard was like, he got this arrow from days of yore, from days of old, when and his father received it from his father, going back to the time of the King Under the Mountain. So right there we have this is the sort of thing you find in like the Song of the Volsungs, where you have Graham, the sort of Sigmunder, which is thrust into a tree by Othin, and then it's drawn out by Sigmunder, and then shattered eventually by Othin in a battle, and then it's reforged by Sigurdur, Sigmunder's son. So Sigurdur got this sword from his father, but also from the ancestor of his clan, because Odin's actually the ancestor of, well, Sigmunder through Sigmunder's father, Volsung. So, yeah, the sword goes back to Othin. That being said, with this black arrow, it kind of is reminiscent in a way of the Volsungs, but also of the likes of Mjolnir from Norse myths, because Mjolnir would strike the enemy when thrown and return to Asa Thor. That is to say, Thor. And it was also the greatest warhammer in all of existence. The only thing is it had a short haft. So, whereas here, the dart doesn't have a short haft. And it's also interesting that it was crafted by the dwarves. I wonder if they're able to, that's why it's able to slay Smaug almost at all. Because no ordinary weapon could have struck down Smaug. Because he was no ordinary dragon. He was, well, he's nothing on Engalagan the Black or Glaurung, but he was certainly fearsome. Well, actually, maybe he could take Glaurung to an extent in a fight, because Glaurung doesn't exactly have wings. It's just Glaurung is clever and sneaky. Well, he has to be. But yeah, so on the other hand, it is interesting how Tolkien mixes the Norse with the Judeo-Christian, melding them so perfectly well together. And now I don't know, and maybe the people who are present, and if they pop into the chat, maybe they could help me out. But I have not seen the Hobbit films. I've only seen, I think, 40 minutes or something of the original Hobbit movie, and I don't remember, by Peter Jackson, and I don't really remember any of it. But I do remember it being pretty close to the book, just stretched out. But maybe someone could point out to me whether or not Jackson did anything to make the Black Arrow of Bard special. Because when you look at Anduril in the movies, it looks great. Oh, like, I may have criticism about the films, but Anduril looks great. Like, who can criticize Anduril? You look at actually any of the weapons in Lord of the Rings, they look great. Like Glamdring looks great. Like the design and costumes and a lot of the look of Middle Earth by Peter Jackson did nail. So I'm not going to criticize his movies on that front for the most part. But I do think that this is an arrow that should be special as the Patriot arrow from Monty Python. Although I don't know if Bard would have gotten another shot had he missed this one. But this begs the question, could he miss after that prayer? Now, I'm not saying Eru Ilúvatar popped in, but I'm just saying in terms of the narrative, could he actually miss?
That's a very good question.
And I know people may say, well, narratively, he could not miss because in the narrative, he hit. But I'm just pondering, like, one has to bear in mind, in the medieval literary sense, you're supposed to pray and you'll get a miracle. If we look at it that way, could it really miss? No. But if we look at it in the Nordic sense, Norse stories are very tragic and dumb stuff happens all the time. So he possibly could miss, or at least not hit the mark well enough, and the dragon will take him down along with it. But what Tolkien does seems to be a halfway point. But I also wonder. Now, I've had a pretty good stream with Robert from Indie Geek, who in some ways was more knowledgeable than I, and is in a lot of ways more knowledgeable than I about the Third Age and about a large portion of the Legendarium. And he took a harsh stance on Thranduil. I kind of regarded Thranduil in a more sympathetic light, but I have to acknowledge that after the events of The Hobbit, of the story of There and Back Again, that Thranduil doesn't do much during the War of the One Ring. He does let people down. He just sends Legolas to go elsewhere, and he decides, well, I'm not going to push things. I'm just going to continue to hide in my little cave and wait for others to solve my problems for me. Hey, it worked in The Hobbit. Okay.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, I do think that we should look at him in a sympathetic light in regards to the events of The Hobbit. And once again, the internet connection's
Wonky.
Yeah, I just hope that people aren't missing too much of the stream. Let's hope that people can hear me and we're not breaking up too much. Oh, look, one person from YouTube, one person from Twitch. Cool. Again, I wonder if either will pop into the chat. But anyways, if there's any discussion points you want to make about Smaug or dragons in general, feel free to throw it out there. I'm going to have to put this stream as part of the Dragon Month playlist on our YouTube channel, as well. This is supposed to be in concert with that, along as are most of our Dragonlance material these days in the past few weeks. And if we're trying to keep it to at least 2, maybe 3 dragons a week, because the thing is, we're trying to keep an event going for fun. While this year we do have to try to also meet the 1K sub celebration stuff. So it's a pretty tricky balancing act. Anyways, Smaug. Now, where Thranduil kind of seems to start to behave himself after he shows up to claim treasure in The Hobbit, this is not the case with Bard and Thorin. Now, I know Bard ends up behaving himself far more than Thorin. I mean, you couldn't behave yourself worse than Thorin. But I wonder if maybe there's a portion of dragon sickness that maybe seeped into Bard, because he does kind of go a little, he gets a little questionable at times when he ends up going after the treasure. He seems pretty eager for it. That said, he does have a claim to it. He slew Smaug. But Thorin doesn't want to hear none of it, because he's trying to behave like Larfleeze from Green Lantern.
Mine.
And the thing you'll recall if you're a Green Lantern fan and you like Larfleeze is what's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine, and what's everyone else's is mine. That's the general role of Larfleeze.
So don't touch anything of mine.
Yeah, exactly. Such a great character. Actually, I wonder if Larfleeze is partially based off of Smaug. Because to an extent, Larfleeze in Green Lantern plays the role of a dragon. He is a dragon archetype.
Yeah. And
the difference is he's befriended and redeemed by Hal Jordan. That's the weird thing about Green Lantern. Like, Larfleeze takes up the role of a dragon archetype, but he doesn't. And he's befriended. I wonder if Jeff Jones drew inspiration from Smaug with the character to an extent.
It's possible.
Yeah. But Smaug is a pretty interesting character. And apparently he inspired most other fantasy dragons. But what I find so peculiar these days is the dearth of decent dragon characters. Because Smaug's a great character. Glaurung's a great character. But given that Dragonlance isn't really doing anything, it's not doing much. And Dragons of Deceit was not exactly exciting. Like, it had its good moments, but it was also boring. I'm just going to be honest. And you look at now, if people disagree, that's fine. Just disagree with me. I don't have a problem with that. If you enjoy Dragons of Deceit, hey, I get it. There are some pretty enjoyable parts. I really, really enjoy the history of, I think, the Rosethorn family it is. I really enjoy the family history. Like, the family lineage and how Waste and Hickman explain it was pretty cool. But the trouble with this story was that, what?
I just can't help but remember the one dragon, I think it's dive bombing against the mountain. Remember the one where the paladin's one dragon defeated the other 5?
Oh, yeah, because she outsmarted Aurora. She outsmarted all the evil dragons. Yeah. Well, Smaug is more like the black dragon in that story of Aurora's eggs.
Yes.
Crafty, smart, but ultimately wicked. But the thing about Smaug is that he's not as smart as he thinks he is. He isn't. He's remarkably he outsmarts himself to an extent. Like, oh, well, is anyone as perfect physically as I am? I mean, look at me. I'm great. I'm gorgeous. And that's the thing. He's a narcissist, Smaug.
So you've got that pride sloth combination.
Yeah, because he looks at his mirror image and goes, wow, have you ever seen a hotter dragon? And see the pun I did there? Hotter dragon.
And because of this opinion of his, he doesn't seek to test his to challenge himself and to improve.
Yeah, I guess, but you're not going to comment on my pun? Because I'm just saying, because Smaug thinks he's hot stuff. I got pages of this. I can keep going. Anyways,
that doesn't mirror my sentiment.
Well, yeah. As long as we agree that there's something rather reptilian about Smaug. My puns are getting better. Seriously, tell me in the chat how great my puns are. I'm joking. Actually, that would be a vanity. But in all seriousness, Smaug, in a way, he's one of the most important characters in The Hobbit, but doesn't show up on screen till the end. And there only for a chapter or two, which this is pretty interesting because this is pretty in keeping with Tolkien. And I've also been noticing one thing about Howard. Howard tended to stick the villain in at the beginning and at the end and say, all right, he doesn't appear in the middle. Like the entire middle part with Howard and with Tolkien is almost without the villain. You have that in Lord of the Rings to an extent. Like the Nazgul are good villains, but they're flunkies. The Witch King of Angmar is a good flunky, but you have entire chunks of the story where you don't really have the villain who appears. It is the hero driving the plot forward. And in Hour of the Dragon, Howard's magnum opus, does Zaltatun show up after the beginning? No, he doesn't show up till the end. Apparently, I only looked up a bit of the ending, but not too much. Don't worry, I don't really know how anything goes near the end. I just looked up to see if Zaltatun's name comes up at the end. But you have here, throughout most of the Hour of the Dragon, Howard's magnum opus, nothing of Saltatoon. He doesn't show up. He doesn't appear. It is Conan driving the plot forward. And yet, this seems to be something that I'll have to give the Chronicles and even the Legend of Huma credit for. The heroes drive the plot forward. Although,
as it should be.
Yeah. Which you look at, how do I put it? Oh wait, I'll just give it a minute. I do wish our internet would be a bit more stable. All right, I'm just going to check something. I'm going to ask those in our chat this, and let's see if I'm going to check to see if maybe if we turn off the cam, we'll have. All right. Hopefully, this will stabilize things as we're having slight internet problems, which is a pain. And I'm going to try maybe putting up an image or something. Let me see. Give me 1 second. I'll just try to find. This thing can be easy. All right. Whoops, wrong folder. All right, video projects. I would just like to stick a pleasant image for everyone so they have something to look at. Though I do think our mascot is pretty good looking. Let's see. Let's zoom in some more. Here we are. There. Now we have Smaug front and center. All right. So this will have to do, as I'm tired of being nervous about whether our internet is breaking up or not, because it breaks up. All right, let's hope there are no more hiccups. And we get a hiccup. This internet. I can't wait to finish moving. This will not be a problem. But we'll be facing other problems. Go figure. Well, that's the thing about life. No matter where you live, you're always going to be facing problems. You're just changing one set of problems for another set of problems. Life's about managing the problems. That being said, let's talk about the biggest problem that Bilbo Baggins had in his quest. That is to say, Smaug. So,
not missing the fifth breakfast?
No. He was able to do without that. Not for long, mind you. But it was more Bomber's complaints about missing out on his seventh lunch that caused him problems. I'm joking. Oh, man, I love Bomber. Such a great character. Bomber was perfect.
Agreed.
He was just the biggest nuisance to the quest, but he was perfect. And I'm glad he got his happy ending, getting so fat that he couldn't even walk anymore. And needing I think it's one of those sedan chairs where you have to carry him for him to get around.
He did. The poor people carrying him.
Well, yeah, but Bomber earned it. Look at all the great things in the quest. sure, he drove off the road, Mirkwood. Yeah, sure, he spent the entire time whining about how hungry he was. Yeah, sure, he didn't contribute anything to slaying Smaug. Yeah, sure, he probably did the least amount of combat in the Battle of the Five Armies, but he contributed plenty. You see, he was there for emotional support for the rest of the team.
Yeah, sure, they had to carry him some way,
Yeah, okay. And break their backs for him.
but at least they got exercise that prepared them for the end.
Yeah, see, he was contributing. No one did more than Bomber to push the team forward. Sorry, I have to laugh. I think in our previous read through, I think Bomber became tied with Bilbo as my favorite character. He's just so dumb in some ways, but he's just so much fun. Oh man, I love Bomber. I wonder, I'm actually starting to think maybe of doing another Hobbit video and just doing a study of what's in each of the of Thorin's companions might be guilty of, and what virtue they might embody.
That's fair.
Because I think that might be partially what Tolkien was going for as well. Although there are 14, but that means that there'd be double representatives of each sin and of each virtue. I wonder if that'd be something people would be interested in. If so, and you're seeing this on the rewatch, do let me know in the comment section. And if you're seeing this on the, and you're able to show up in the chat, like we keep saying, we're always hungry for more people in the chat. Anyways, or if you want to ask us directly in the chat, but you're getting this on the rewatch, we'll be live tomorrow as well, so you can pop on by then and ask us what we think, as that's going to be a more general chat. Now, Smaug, I wonder if to an extent the dragon sickness is, because I know like dragon sickness seeped into the Nauglamir, and from there into the one Silmaril that was attached to the Nauglamir when it was fused with the Silmaril, I mean. And it really went haywire on Thingol and went haywire on, Thingol was already starting to give in to the Silmaril's curse. The Nauglamir was just icing on a bad cake, so to speak. But when it comes to the dragon sickness here, while I don't think that Bard was giving in to the Arkenstone sickness, I wonder if maybe he got too close to Smaug for a bit, and it took him a little while to shake off Smaug's influence over him. Now, one thing that does require mention when discussing Smaug is the role that the story of the Hobbit and the quest of Erebor, how it pertains to the larger legendarium at large. Now, since I've been having the profound and magnificent pleasure of listening to a audiobook of Lord of the Rings, this in spite of how I've had to pause my reading of the French version of the text, maybe I'll just go live every week or so and just read from French Lord of the Rings, and that might be worth something. And then I'll just download and add a bit of music in the background. But that would be for Tadkin en Traduction, which I encourage everyone to go and subscribe to over there, because, that's our French channel. And if you understand any French, it'd be nice to have more French subs.
Bien sûr.
Pas là-bas. But if you don't, it's fine. Don't worry about the French channel. Just share it and subscribe. I'm over there as well. I'm joking. But in all seriousness, the quest of Erebor is a quest where, in the larger scheme of things, Gandalf breaks off in the middle of the story to go deal with the necromancer of Mirkwood. who happens to be Sauron. And the thing is, Gandalf had to frighten off Sauron, who fled because he was not prepared to face off against Gandalf and the whole of the White Council. He wasn't foolish. Without the One Ring, he would never venture such a battle. And that being said, the reason Gandalf was keen to get rid of Smaug, though, was that he needed Smaug out of the way so that Sauron could not have Smaug as a backup. Because of the way things are, you have... Now, Gandalf did not count on Saruman turning traitor in the middle of the Lord of the Rings. Well, actually, early in the Lord of the Rings, I should say. But Saruman did betray everyone. This came as a shock to Gandalf. And who could blame him? Saruman's betrayal was a big deal because Saruman was basically head of the Order of the Astari and of the White Council. Saruman was the most preeminent of the wise. And so, when he turned foul, this was a big blow. And this ended up causing what Gandalf feared to an extent. Gandalf was trying to keep the Rohirrim and Gondor from being surrounded on both sides. Now, he had on one end Sauron building up his armies and whatnot over in Mordor. And on the other, you had Saruman building up an army over in Orthanc. And this caused everyone to be surrounded. Now, the heroes managed, and the Fellowship managed to handle this far better than, I say Fellowship, but you know what I mean. Like, Rohan and Gondor handled it far better than what Gandalf probably predicted they could have, to an extent. And one should never forget that Smaug was to the rear, and as well. So what if, and even if, let's say, you fall in with the idea that Gandalf knew about Saruman, or I think he kind of suspected, but he also didn't want to see it, weirdly. So what happens if you get Sauron, and Smaug, all three encircling Rohan, for one thing, and Gondor? And Gondor depended on Rohan to come to the rescue in the War of the One Ring, especially when you had Denethor becoming a nincompoop. And I know a lot of people are very fond of Denethor. I'm fond of Denethor to an extent. He was a competent leader, contrary to the movie portrayal. Denethor was a brilliant politician and war leader. It's just Sauron ended up playing with his head a little. One has to bear in mind that Faramir and Boromir were competent. They had to have learned it from somewhere, and it was from Denethor. So what happens when you have a dragon flying around breathing fire on armies? That's not going to end well. And so Smaug would need to be dealt with. Now, given that Gandalf did not count on, as said, Saruman turning traitor, this was almost the equivalent of Smaug being behind, like to their rear. And this was a catastrophe. That being said, Smaug was to prove almost more manageable than what I think Gandalf probably realized he might be. On the other hand, what's interesting is that in a lot of dialogue in Lord of the Rings early on, Gandalf states that he suspected Bilbo would be of some key importance in slaying Smaug, and that he knew that Smaug would fall because of Bilbo's actions, and that Thorin would not perish against Smaug. Like, the amount of foresight and almost divine foresight that Gandalf had in regards to Smaug is pretty darn impressive. And this is where his desire to keep from having the heroes encircled is very commendable, because militarily you don't want that. And only the most foolish of peoples and leaders decide, yeah, you know what, encircle me. It's just not something that typically works out all that well. That being said, Gandalf handled Smaug very well, and what's more is that, sorry, I had to take a drink. With Smaug kind of dealt with, you then got the Battle of the Five Armies. There, I'm not entirely sure Gandalf predicted that would happen. But let's be honest, it was something that I think that Gandalf was kind of prepared for. And we have to bear in mind, maybe to an extent, his ring played a role in influencing some of the men into doing the right thing, because Gandalf inspires hope, and naturally, and his ring increases those abilities, because he is really the spirit of hope itself, embodied in the flesh of an old man. So, if Gandalf is hope itself, this means that men will turn more to hope. And in the case of the Battle of the Five Armies, then Ironfoot, Bard, and Thranduil would turn more towards their only hope, which is each other, against the forces of the goblins from the Misty Mountains. And so Gandalf is really the key figure at the end, I would argue. That being said, Bard, if there was any dragon sickness at all, which I'm just saying, you can read it into the text, but that's not a sure thing, it's gone. Bard, one should look at him as behaving rather like a lot of dragon slayers in literature do. All right, I slew the dragon. It's mine. What he had was mine now. Fafnir's dead. Treasure's mine. And you know what? The treasure did end up falling into the hands of Sigmundur. And at least in the Norse myth, you look at almost any other dragon myth, the dragon's treasures always go to he who slays him. Which, okay, sure. But the trouble is, this would have involved a lot of bloodshed, needlessly so. But thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and the goblins did show up. It's a good thing they showed up, because Thorin was redeemed before he could become too terrible and too draconic to an extent, at least in temperament and in greed. And, of course, the other heroes rallied. So, with that said, I don't know if I have anything further to add. So I'll wish everyone a great day, and remind everyone to not to forget to smash that like and that subscribe button, as though you were Bard taking down Smaug, as we very much would appreciate all of your assistance and support, as we're trying now to get to 2,000 subs. So do take care, everyone.